Hello, my name is Stephanie Dominguez, and I will be discussing one of the main challenges that the United States is currently facing. So, I will be going over the differences between homegrown violent extremists, abbreviated as HVEs, and domestic violent extremists, abbreviated as DVEs, what lone wolf attacks are, some of these attacks that have been committed by HVEs, DVEs, and lone wolves. Some of the warning signs that have been missed that have led to these terrorist attacks, some of the pre-existing policies and programs that are already in place to counter terrorism, and what could potentially be done to prevent these terrorist attacks from happening in the future. What are the differences between homegrown violent extremists and domestic violent extremists? Homegrown violent extremists are influenced by foreign terrorist organizations. Typically, these terrorist organizations are religion-oriented, such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda, who are based on Islamic extremist views. They reject Western cultural values, beliefs, and norms. On the other hand, domestic violent extremists are influenced by domestic issues including political, racial, environmental, or social, and they include far-right and far-left extremists. For example, white supremacists fall under domestic violent extremists. What they both have in common is that they have the intentions to and/or commit acts of terror within the United States, and they have become more popular in recent years. These individuals or groups of individuals can be anyone really. They can be US citizens, they can be residents, they can even be legal immigrants. But regardless of their immigration status, they have the intention to cause harm within the United States. What are lone wolf attacks? A lone wolf is an individual who carries out a terrorist attack on their own. Although they don't have the support that a terrorist typically would receive from a large terrorist organization, they do cause some of the most lethal attacks. They also tend to be more difficult to trace down since they are working alone and they are more cautious of the things that they do. According to the US Department of Homeland Security, between 2018 and 2019, there was an estimate of 23 attacks and 49 deaths that were caused by these violent extremists. As you can see on the graph, white supremacist extremists were and continue to be the highest threat in the United States. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the majority of terrorist attacks since 1994 have been committed by right-wing extremists, with the exception of 2013. Following right-wing extremists are terrorists with religious influences. It can be seen that after 2001, attacks committed by religious terrorists increased, meaning that there was a spread of Islamic extremist views and more homegrown violent extremists were created. The September 11, 2001 attack committed by Al-Qaeda could have influenced this increase of religious terrorists in the following years. These are some of the more recent attacks committed by homegrown violent extremists across the nation. There's the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building bombing that occurred in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma in 1996. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, also known as the FBI, states that this bombing was the worst act of homegrown terrorism in the nation's history. There were 160 individuals who lost their lives, dozens of cars incinerated, and over 300 buildings damaged or destroyed. Then there's the Boston Marathon bombing that occurred in Boston, Massachusetts in 2013. And this was done by two brothers, one who was 19 and the other was 26. And they planted two pressure cooker bombs, which they created themselves at their home, and placed them in backpacks near the finish line of the marathon. This killed 3 spectators and wounded over 260 other people. The Inland Regional Center shooting that happened in San Bernardino, California in 2015 was done by a married couple who had been radicalized over a span of years. And this institution is one that provides services to individuals with developmental disabilities, in which the husband worked at. And during this shooting, there were 14 people killed and 22 who were wounded. The Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, Florida, that happened in 2016, and the Lower Manhattan attack in New York City that occurred in 2017 are also two other examples of attacks that were committed by homegrown violent extremists. These are some of the more well-known attacks committed by domestic violent extremists, with most of them having far-right motives. The Route 91 Harvest Music Festival shooting that happened in Las Vegas, Nevada on October 1st, 2017 was one of the deadliest committed by domestic violent extremists. There were 61 individuals killed, including the perpetrator himself, and 867 individuals that were killed, with 411 of them being killed by gunfire. There was a shooting in a Walmart in El Paso, Texas on August 3rd, 2019, that was committed by a 21-year-old male. He killed 23 and injured 23, and had the motives of far-right white supremacy extremism, specifically leaning towards anti-immigration and Hispanophobia. These are a few of the many lone wolf attacks that have occurred within the nation. As you can see, there's a mix between homegrown violent extremists and domestic violent extremist attacks that happen to also be lone wolf attacks. The Centennial Olympic Park bombing in Atlanta, Georgia in 1996 was one of the 4 bombs that was let off by Eric Rudolph in Georgia and Alabama between the years of 1996 and 1998, of which he killed 2 individuals and injured over 100 more. The Pulse nightclub shooting in 2016 was one of the deadliest mass shootings that was committed by a homegrown violent extremist lone wolf. This shooting ended the lives of 49 individuals and severely injured 53 more. In the Lower Manhattan attack that occurred in New York City in 2017, there were 8 individuals killed and 12 others severely injured as a result of a violent act that was committed by a 29-year-old male. He drove a rental truck down a pedestrian walkway and bicycle path on the west side of Manhattan. This attack is said to be the deadliest attack that occurred in New York City since September 11, 2001. These are some of the policies, programs, and resources already put in place. There's the Community Awareness Briefing, abbreviated as CAB, the Law Enforcement Awareness Briefing, abbreviated as LAB, the Community Resilience Exercise, abbreviated as CREX, the Fiscal Year 2021 Budget Request, the Fiscal Year 2020 Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention Grant Program, the Fiscal Year 2016 Countering Violent Extremism Grant Program, the 2019 Department of Homeland Security Strategic Framework for Countering Terrorism and Targeted Violence, the 2018 National Counterterrorism Strategy, and there's 6 models, intervention models that were also created. Aside from these, the Department of Homeland Security offers a list of up-to-date resources to stay educated with various ways to be radicalized, various attacks that have recently occurred, etc. Overall, domestic terrorism is far more prominent than international terrorism in the United States. Homegrown violent extremists and domestic violent extremists continue to pose a great threat to U.S. national security. Everyone must work together to combat terrorism as much as possible. This includes the President of the United States, White House officials, law enforcement agencies, federal agencies, and even your average citizen. It is crucial for federal agencies to share information with one another about any warning signs about an individual. And as stated, citizens also have to play their part in helping identify any potential terrorists. As previously stated, countering terrorism is an effort that is all hands on deck. In order to make some progress in decreasing the amount of domestic terrorist attacks committed by homegrown violent extremists and domestic violent extremists, U.S. officials, federal agencies, and law enforcement agencies should consider the following. They should review existing policies such as the DHS Strategic Framework for Countering Terrorism and Targeted Violence and National Counterterrorism Strategy, and determine whether any additional policies need to be put in effect in order to reduce the possibility of a terrorist attack. There should be laws put in place where the perpetrator of a domestic terrorist attack can be heavily charged for the violent crime they have committed. There should be more attention put on the amount of warning signs missed about an individual to prevent additional terrorist attacks from occurring. There should be an increase in the implementation of community awareness briefing, as stated before, CAB, to where every community member is able to be educated on radicalization, violent criminal acts, and the process of how to identify an individual that is being radicalized. And lastly, there should be an increase in the mental health resources available to assist individuals who are being radicalized to lessen the likelihood of behavioral changes, which could lead to a potential violent criminal act. Here are some of the references that I have used. Thank you all for listening. I hope you have a great day.